Welcome to the Real Clear Politics Takeaway for Friday, November 6th. I'm Andrew Walworth. Well, we are all living in Tom Bevan's personal nightmare, something which regular listeners to this podcast have heard about now for months. That is a close election that will be contested in the courts, taking weeks or even months to decide, with the possibility that the next president will be chosen as a result of a decision in the courts. And if that isn't enough, polling, and pollsters themselves are all under attack in the wake of an extraordinary couple of days, with the president and others accusing pollsters of releasing results that favor his opponent in an attempt to manipulate turnout. He calls these polls suppression polls. Well, joining me to sort through all this are some of my colleagues from Real Clear Politics. Tom Bevan is co-founder and president of RCP. Karl, Washington Bureau Chief, and Trende, Senior Elections Analyst. So, Tom, I'm not sure you should feel good about being right, but this is basically the scenario you described. Are you feeling vindicated, and how do you see the election, and what do you think happens next?
Look, the only person that I want to drag on this is Karl. This is not one of my favorite I told you so moments. Karl was like, we're going to know on Wednesday. It's going to be great. It's all going to go smoothly. I
didn't say it all going smoothly. I said we know on Wednesday. And I guess I could say I knew Wednesday, but I'd be lying.
Right. So, yeah, look, this was, I think, despite...
We would have known Wednesday if these guys had figured out how to count votes properly. That's not my fault.
Listen, I think despite, again, a lot of the media and pundits portraying this as a not close election, that there was going to be this blue wave, that Biden had a 93% chance of winning 300 plus electoral majority, which it's going to end up probably being that. But certainly Democrats fell short in the House, lost seats, fell short in the Senate, fell short in state legislatures around the country. So it was a close election, I think, in many respects, and it is going to be litigated, and we'll see how it turns out. I mean, I suspect, Donald Trump he would have to, you talk about first it was pulling the inside straight, and then it was like the flush. That's I think where things stand right now, he would have to have a royal flush, I think.
He'd have to win the Irish sweepstakes.
Well, in order for all the court challenges to go and any recounts to go in his favor, he'd have to pull ahead in Arizona. He'd have to get a reversal in Pennsylvania. So I think he's up against it now, and I suspect, Joe Biden is probably going to be the next president of the United States.
But how long do you think it's going to take?
Well, that's another situation. I think there will probably be someone will call this race on Joe. And Decision Desk HQ has already called it, but a major player will call this race in the next, I would say, 6 to 12 hours would be my guess, as Biden's vote total continues to go up in Pennsylvania. And gets into that territory where it's beyond a recount situation, perhaps. So, and then we're going to see, I think, Democrats and plenty of folks in the media and everybody just sort of move on, and Trump's going to be, and the Trump campaign and folks in conservative media are going to be standing there saying, hey, hold on a second, wait a minute, we've got more work to do here, investigations and the like. So we're going to see a real sort of split screen dual reality taking place here. I would expect it today, if not tomorrow.
So, Karl, did you cancel your fly fishing expedition for this weekend?
Look, we really knew yesterday. I was only off for one day. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Listen, let's get to the heart of it, Andy, because Tom mentioned this, and I've been wanting to ask Trende. What went wrong with the polls? Let's get to the heart of this.
If I really don't know. We had a pretty good theory for a long time that what had gone wrong in 2016 was whites without college degrees didn't get picked up by pollsters. And so if you just waited for that, when you got a white without a college degree in your sample, you counted their response more to make it a more reasonable sample overall, that you'd get a good answer. And then we looked at, or I should say I looked at 2018, and the responses in the upper Midwest were not so good. Not a single poll had Mike DeWine winning as governor, and yet He's definitely the governor. No, I think one poll over the course of the entire campaign had Ron DeSantis winning in Florida. He's the governor. So it started to seem like maybe this wasn't really the problem, that it might be something different. So kind of there's two theories I'm working with. One of them is much, much worse than the other for the industry. The not so terrible option is that it's not whites without college degrees. It's an interaction, if you will, of whites without college degrees and place. So if you bump up your sample of whites without college degrees, but your whites without college degrees are baristas and college students, you haven't fixed the problem, right? Because you still have a sample of whites without college degrees that's too liberal. What you really need to be doing is also weighting by place. So if you get a rural white without a college degree, that's what needs to be bumped up. Because what we're not getting are farmers and, laid off steel workers in Youngstown and stuff like that. If that's what it is, then that's good because you can fix that.
But what you're talking about there is constructing the sample. When you're trying to anticipate what the actual electorate looks like, you put together a group of people. It's like a dinner party. You're trying to get, a mix that reflects things. And you're saying that they've got the mix wrong because their categories that they're using are not the right ones. Not having a college degree does not mean that all people in that group are going to vote a certain way.
Yeah. The analogy that I use is that my dad has a 58 Ford, and you open the hood and there's an inline 8 engine and some wires, a battery, and a radiator. And he and I can fix anything on it in a matter of hours, unless we have to completely rebuild the engine. It's very straightforward. I have a 2016 Ford Explorer, and you need an electrical and engineering degree just to change the oil. Okay? That's the difference between polling today and polling 30 years ago. 30 years ago, when no one had call ID, no one had cell phones, you just did your random calling sample, and you would get a sample that looks like America. But today, when only 2% of people respond to pollsters and there's biases in how they respond, you have to wait. And at that point, it starts to become more of an art than a science. So I want to real quickly put one other thing out. If I'm wrong about it being play, and I know this is a long-winded answer, but this is a really important question. If I'm wrong about it being place, if there's some attitude like lack of social trust, that correlates with being a Trump voter, there's nothing you can do about that because you can't wait to an attitude. And that's the really bad scenario.
So, Sean, let's drill down on that a little bit, because I view this, and I think we have to be very specific about this, because there were really two worldviews about this election, right? You had sort of the 538 A+ crowd, Quinnipiac, Washington Post, New York Times, Siena. They all got it terribly wrong. And then you had the 538 C-D crowd, right? Trafalgar, Susquehanna, Insider Advantage, that projected a much closer race, right? And, Trafalgar talked about this all the time. I mean, he does ask those questions. He was able to get the respondents and, the weighting properly to, I think, forecast this election outcome more closely, more accurately than these other folks. So it's not that everybody's getting it wrong and everybody can't identify, Trump supporter, Trump, shy Trump, or whatever you want to say, but certain people are getting it wrong. And the certain people who are getting it wrong are the ones that are sort of they're the, elites in the academy, the media-backed folks. And I think the pundits did the same thing they did in 2016, which was to take the data that fit their preconceived narrative about this race, which was, it's not like 2016 for all these reasons, Joe Biden's favorable ratings and yada, 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 right? And my district polls and all this stuff. And they marginalized and discounted the data that didn't fit their narrative, and by saying, oh, that's just, it's Trafalgar and it's these guys are Republican hacks and whatever. Because if you look at Wisconsin, just for example, right? And everyone talks about the ABC News Washington Post poll, 17 points. Throw that out. That's an outlier, right? ABC News Washington Post actually got it right in Florida. They had Trump +2 there. But New York Times Siena had Biden +11. Emerson had Biden +10. And the only person who got it right was Trafalgar, and they had Biden +1. And Susquehanna had Biden +3. Everything else was 8, 8, 8, 10, and 11. That's not even including the Washington Post poll. So I think we need to be specific about, it wasn't the entire polling industry. It was part of it. And then that was reinforced by the pundits, who I think gave more weight to those responses than the others to craft this narrative. The Charlie Cook, Dems are going to pick up 3 to 7 Senate seats and, 15 House seats and all these state legislative races around, and it just never materialized because it wasn't reality.
The issue, part of the problem is, and this isn't a problem, I'll give the objection, then I'll respond to it. Like Trafalgar and Inside Advantage and Susquehanna aren't terribly transparent about exactly what it is they're doing. Like Haley goes on TV and he talks about questions, but as far as actually seeing the guts of how it works, no one knows. That is because they are a business, not a political science paper. It isn't like the New York Times Siena poll, where it's almost like a vanity project of the New York Times. And so they can make all their data available and all their methods available because they don't care if someone copies it. It's the branding that is the benefit. The problem is that we don't know exactly what it is they did that worked. And so what's to me the most exciting thing this cycle was the USC Dornsife tracking poll that also started asking these questions. Who are your neighbors voting for? Who do you think is going to carry your state? And they found in 5 previous elections that those questions do a better job of predicting than their horse race questions. And once again, they actually published their tracking poll if they had used these alternate questions, and it was much closer than their national tracking poll. So what we need is more of that. We need now these academics and these vanity projects to start experimenting with these other questions and seeing if they can help get around these social desirability problems.
So, Karl, we're talking about the technique of polling, how you construct the samples, are they asking the right questions? But the president's accusation really goes to motive. He is saying that these people are designing these polls not to be correct, but to help out the Democrats. What do you make of that?
Well, it's a political argument, not a political science argument. And what Sean is talking about in terms of, these pollsters want to be right. Nobody has if you're going to have any credibility, if you're a businessman, you have to be right. What Sean's suggesting is that these media polls have other motivations. I don't mean motivations to skew the election, but motivations to promote their brand and to reach their readers and other things. And I don't know how that translates, or even if it does, into a subtle bias on the part of the pollster. Sean's talking now about how we root bias out of the electorate to find out what they're really thinking. But do these pollsters have biases? Now, that the president said it in his normal, crass, overstated way. But let's turn it around. Let's look at it this way. If you had a poll in Wisconsin run by Fox News that had showed Donald Trump 17 points ahead, and you'd have all these other polls that consistently overstated Trump's view done by media that were friendly to Trump, or academics that were friendly to Trump. I don't know where you'd find them, Liberty College, university maybe, but the Democrats would be screaming voter suppression. This thing that Trump said yesterday sounded kind of crazy, but that's the kind of talking points that people use now in politics. And so if it had been reversed, if the errors had been on the other side, the Democrats would be saying exactly what Donald Trump is. That doesn't make it right. But let's put this argument in a context. The Republicans feel that there was an attempt there, maybe unconscious, maybe conscious, to lower the expectations and motivations of the Trump voters. It's a fair point to ask.
So clearly, if it was designed at suppressing the Republican vote, it did work. I mean, Republican turnout was huge, as was Democratic turnout. I don't know. I'm not willing to necessarily assign motives to these folks, but it is a problem. There are inherent biases in the way this is constructed. These polls are constructed, the way that they're reported in the media. Karl, I'll put it in language that you would understand. It would be like a. You
use small words, Tom.
Okay. It would be like a bunch of American League sports writers, okay, talking about how the National League doesn't have any chance of winning the World Series because the American League is stronger. I mean, their viewpoint, their starting point comes from a perspective that I think, and that's part of the problem, I think, is again, because, this data, it comes out, it doesn't reflect reality, and it is promoted by and taken and promoted by the media into, the fact, I tweeted this the other day, and, Sean's tweeted about this, the fact that everybody incessantly talked about how this Senate seat in Kansas was in play, okay, and it was a real pickup opportunity for the Democrats. Roger Marshall won that seat by a higher percentage than Mark Warner won in Virginia, right? But nobody talked about that. You could go across the map, and Sean can speak to this too, and just example after example where the media narrative.
Lindsey Graham was in trouble, remember?
Yeah, the media narrative just did not match reality, and that's and that is a real problem, and there needs to be accountability and a reckoning of that and for that.
Sean, what do you think?
Yeah, the New Mexico Senate race
was closer,
like 6 points.
Yeah.
That Marshall race in Kansas is more than twice the combined Democratic margin in Minnesota and Michigan. And yet, if you suggested John Jay, we got just dragged on Twitter repeatedly for having that Michigan Senate race as a toss-up. And it was more of a toss-up than possibly Tom Tillis's Senate race in North Carolina.
Well, Sean, let me ask you about that Michigan race, because that's what I think what the Republicans are alluding to. So Peters won, we think, they got 100% of the precincts, and he won by 1.5% of the vote. Suppose the media narrative had been, you've got this attractive African-American Republican, he has a chance. Would money and attention and votes have flowed his way? In other words, did the conventional wisdom, the narrative of the blue wave that these Republican Senate had no chance, did it affect the outcome? That's the question I think we need to ask ourselves. I'd be interested in what you think.
So at the end of the day, I think John James, so what he didn't get was the local media cover, and maybe he got more than I think, but I think getting a fancy profile in the Washington Post, maybe he would have fundraised more. But at the end of the day, he had enough money to get his message out. Now, did he get the type of fawning local media coverage that Jamie Harrison got in South Carolina on his Tuesday by 10 points? No, I don't think so. Jamie Harrison, I think he ended up raising $100 million.
That's right. Most of it from California, I would assume.
Yeah, but that's the thing. James had money, so he got his message out. The question is, we're talking about 45,000 people changing their votes. Could that have happened if you'd had more? Now, where I think Republicans maybe have more of a gripe and fewer people are talking about, and I'm trying to, because everyone's waiting for these races, these presidentials to be called, the internet sites are going slowly.
What state are you talking about?
New Mexico. That race right now is 51.6 to 45.7. I do this for a living, and I couldn't have told you who the Republican was. Mark Ronchetti. If that race had been hyped up, might he have raised $20 million and been able to make a real race of it? I don't know. But the fact that all of the quote unquote expert handicappers had Lindsey Graham as a toss up, Susan Collins as a toss up, this Kansas Senate seat as a toss up, Mitch McConnell, likely Republican, not safe. The whole thing was sort of slanted in a way that did not reflect actual reality on the ground and what voters ended up doing. And so, Mitch McConnell is up by 21 points. That's roughly the same margin that Jeff Merkley is up by in Oregon. Okay. It's more than Dick Durbin is up by in Illinois,
we never mentioned those races. Yeah.
Cory Booker is winning by 20 points.
And Amy McGrath is another candidate, that gets all of this attention. She raised all this money and she got 39% of the vote. I mean,
38.
38. I mean, it's
so there's really
ridiculous.
Two issues though we're talking about here. One is the polling itself, and the other is the pundits and how they interpret it, and the press and how they report on it. And so, Tom, if polling is not giving us accurate predictions, what should we be looking at? If not polls, what does tell us about how elections will go?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I do think, according to the Republicans, they had their data was showing these races closer. I've seen some folks say that some of their internal polls were spot on, and that stuff gets ignored or dismissed. And part of this might be because it's 2020 and COVID, but it may have exacerbated this trend that we've seen, which is reporters no longer actually go out and report. They just look at polls and say, instead of going and sitting in diners and talking to voters about what they actually think and building, some real, doing the old fashioned shoe leather reporting, it's much easier to just look at a crosstab and be like, oh, well, Susan Collins is losing white voters by 20 points. And of course she's, it's just.
Well, can I interject something there, Tom?
Not yet. I'm on a roll, man.
No. No, just, you can pick it up. Just a minute.
Now you ruined my flow. It's over. It's gone.
In fairness of the reporters, this was the pandemic year. You couldn't do that kind of thing.
I caveated my statement by saying that.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not a question of laziness. It's a question.
Well,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Tom, please finish. We are living in your nightmare.
Karl, it is a trend, though, that has been going on pre-pandemic, right? It may have been exacerbated by the pandemic, but certainly we do get a lot more of this, just people writing about polls and horse race analysis without actually having any real reporting on what's going on in the state.
So, Sean, what about the averages? I mean, at Real Clear, we take these polls, we average them. Looking forward to the next cycle, do you think Real Clear should be doing something differently than they're doing now?
No.
Okay.
Our poll averages were the best out there. I mean, I've had my share of anxiety levels about these things, and people said, you need to mean revert.
What is that? Just tell us what mean revert means.
Oh, this is one hell of a podcast we got going.
That was somebody calling to ask me, what does mean revert mean? I didn't know we were live, Andy.
No, there's this thing. A lot of the modelers do it, where if a pollster is consistently 2 or 3 points more Republican than the herd, you kind of drag their polls back to the herd. So, like, if you get a Trafalgar poll showing Trump up 5, you count it as Trump up 1 because they're typically like 4 points more Republican than everyone else.
That's also called adjusting for House effect, right?
Yeah, adjusting for the so-called House effect. The problem is, these things are, there's no reason, the justification for doing that. You don't know what the overall bias is going to be by the end. Like, maybe Trafalgar has it right and everyone else has it wrong. So, we just do the simple poll average. And I mean, everything's so slow right now. I'm trying to pull up what our final averages are, but I think they look pretty darn good.
They do.
We actually got again, I am just worked up over some of this stuff, but our final poll average in Pennsylvania, we got dragged for showing, and for showing it tightening, and your final average is 6 polls. You got CNBC Change Research and NBC News Marist, the quote unquote good polls showing Biden up 4 or 5, and then you've got Susquehanna, Rasmussen, Trafalgar, and Inside Advantage, your C- polls. We have Biden up 1.2 points in our final average, and that's about what it's going to be. Why would we change anything?
Tom, you think we should change anything?
Look, I think our averages are going to hold up very, very well when all the votes are finally counted. And, we had Arizona under a point. It was leaning Biden. Maybe it'll come out that maybe Trump will pull ahead. We had Georgia under, I think we had Trump up a point there. It looks like, Biden may win that by a few thousand votes. I mean, for me, the big miss was in Florida, where all of the pollsters overshot the mark on Biden's support there. which, again, is what they did in 2018. And again, Trafalgar was the only one to show Ron DeSantis winning that race over Andrew Gillum and Rick Scott winning that race over Bill Nelson, right? And he had it right again this time. There's something going on in Florida where pollsters just consistently seem to overestimate the Democrats' strength there. This goes back, multiple cycles. But, again, I think our averages are going to hold up well. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't take a look at the individual pollsters and how they all performed and talk about, folks who got it right and who got it wrong and push for transparency, accountability. All those things are necessary and required and are good things for us and for everybody who's in this business.
I was just going to add to what Sean and Tom said. Tom and I were talking, I forget if it was late last night or early this morning, but this Sturm and Drang of this week, it's been very unnerving. But you're going to look back on this, people are going to be doing term papers in high school on the 2020 campaign, and it's going to look on paper like a normal result. Joe Biden's going to win the popular vote, 51-48, slightly less than his pre-election polls showed. He's going to win by 5 million votes or so. He's going to win 320 electoral votes or something.
306.
Yeah, and it's going to look like a referendum on an incumbent who had a passionate base, but was controversial and was probably undone by a coronavirus pandemic that he didn't handle very well, and an economy that was struggling. In other words, it's going to look still like a very closely divided nation, 50-50 nation, where the incumbent lost and the Republicans held their own and even picked up seats down ballot in the House and the legislatures, partly in response to Democrats flirting with socialism. It's going to be an interesting race, but we're going to be talking 10 years from now, I think, about different things that we're talking about today.
It just strikes me as sort of ironic that, because I think Donald Trump really did juice Republican turnout. His performance among Hispanic voters, minority voters in some of these districts, Republicans are going to pick up, 11 seats in the House. They didn't lose a single state legislature. He held Democratic he pulled Tom Tillis and Joni Ernst and some of these other folks across the line to save the Senate. And he did all that, and he's going to be the one who pays the price and is kicked out of office. Do we think Trump's going away? Is he going to turn around and run again? What's the future look like for the Republican Party and for Donald Trump if this thing right now does not go his way?
There's going to be a big debate, I think, over what the takeaway from Donald Trump should be for Republicans. Because he didn't lose by such a margin that it's a complete repudiation and there's nothing you can learn. I think the trick is the Republicans benefit from all the kind of marginal cultural conservatives that Donald Trump draws out. And then they get a bonus for not being Donald Trump, for the kind of, I'm a conservative suburbanite, but I don't really care for Donald Trump, but I'll still vote Republican down ballot. That's why they all overperformed him. The trick for Republicans going forward is going to be trying to figure out how to get those cultural conservatives out without turning off those suburbanites. A kinder, gentler Donald Trump, if you will. But look,
is that Don Jr.?
Trumpism without Trump, right?
Ivanka's the kinder, gentler.
In honesty, like one of the problems that Republicans have is kind of similar to what the Democrats had after Obama, which is that Obama was a celebrity he was a serious guy, but he was a celebrity candidate with appeal to marginal Democratic voters that just don't show up for anyone but Barack Obama. And I think Republicans probably have a similar problem. Donald Trump's a celebrity candidate for a lot of voters, and it's going to be very tough to get them to show up for someone who's not Donald Trump.
Karl, last word.
The last word is I will give to Abraham Lincoln. You guys know my story about that. Glenn Anderson, the former lieutenant governor of California, was pressed into giving a speech on the governor was sick. He had about 2 hours notice. And he ran out. He was from Long Beach. He ran out and gave a speech and came back. And they said, what did you talk about? He said, I talked about Lincoln. Lincoln's always sound. On November 6th, 1860, Abraham Lincoln learned at 10 at night from a telegram from Pennsylvania, of all places, that he'd carried Pennsylvania and probably was going to be the president. And the boss in Pennsylvania told him that in New York was safe. That was the word he used. Lincoln he stayed up till 2 a.m. at the telegraph office in Springfield, Illinois, and the New York returns came in. He had won. He knew he was the president. And this is how Lincoln responded. This was about 2 a.m, Lincoln later recalled. I went home, but not to get much sleep, for I then felt as I had never before the responsibility that was upon me.
Well, on that note, we will leave it. This is going to continue. This is a conversation we'll be continuing here on the podcast in the days and weeks ahead. I want to thank everyone for being here. Tom Bevan, Karl Cannon, Sean Trende. Thank you for listening. This has been the Real Clear Politics Takeaway for Friday, November 6th. For Real Clear Politics, I'm Andrew Walworth.